Okay guys, I wanted to start this video series as a way of showing people, hey, if you have never touched a firearm, but you think that this is something you want to start taking your personal security safety, you maybe want to buy your first gun, want to protect your wife, your kids, your family, whatever it is, at that point in time, a lot of people don't know where to go. And so I have a lot of content out there for people that are a little bit, had some professional level training and really know what it is that they're doing. But for y'all out there, you don't know what you don't know. And so this video series is really designed for you. It's designed for you as first-time gun owners. Now, I may show you a few things that as experienced gun owners you don't know, but if you're a first-time gun owner or you've never really had any professional level training, this video series is for you. So let's start this off with Cooper's 4, right? So our 4 fundamental safety rules. The first one on here, right? And again, guys, there is a technical order for this. The order is kind of irrelevant though. The first one on here, we keep our finger off the trigger until we are ready to fire. Now, there's some tactical questions that go into that. At what point in time do we put our finger on the trigger, right? So if I'm clearing through my house and checking for bad guys, do I have my finger on the trigger here where I'm ready to go and then extend out? Or does my finger go on the trigger when I extend out? Or does my finger go on the trigger when I extend out and I actually have something in my targets that I may want to shoot at, right? Okay. So let me give you kind of the down and dirty to it in the simplest rule possible. Your finger goes on the trigger when you have made positive identification, so PID, of a threat that you need to eliminate. At that point in time, you are ready to fire and your finger goes on the trigger, which means here, I'm off the trigger. Here, I'm off the trigger. I recognize my threat. I know what I'm shooting at that point in time. Finger goes on the trigger. I'm ready to fire at any point in time. So I can take my finger back off the trigger, but at this point in time, I'm ready to fire. And so my theory on it is, when my finger goes on the trigger, at that point in time, I should be able to prep my trigger. And when I say prep the trigger, I mean pull the slack out of the trigger just like that, right? So I can prep my trigger. At that point in time, I should be comfortable to fire because I'm obviously not going to hold something here, prep my trigger when I'm not ready to pull it, right? So at this point in time, I'm prepping my trigger. I'm ready to fire at any moment, but I'm choosing not to fire, okay? So finger off the trigger until we're ready to fire, all right? The next one here is do not point your muzzle at anything you're not willing to destroy. Now that seems fairly simple, right? We don't want to point our muzzle, but what happens is I go to the range, I'll come out with new people, and immediately they'll go like this when they have a malfunction, and they're shooting everybody down the line with that barrel, right? That invisible laser that comes out of our barrel. Or what ends up happening is people will grab their gun, they hold their finger on the trigger, and it's just this is they're waving it around nimbly. And guys, every one of these directions is safe, by the way. So it's a concrete building backed inside of a hill, so that's why we can do dry fire practice in here. But they're waving their direction around or their gun around nimbly, so that's a huge problem. So really, we want to pretend like there's always that laser beam coming out, which means that when I'm down here and my gun is ready and stacked up, it should not be pointing at my feet, my knees, my legs, anything like that, right? When I'm dropping it to get a retention grip or to extend out and fire, whatever it is, right? At that point in time, I'm engaging that threat, right? Obviously, I'm going to cross them with my weapon. Now, here's the rule with any of these safety rules. It is very difficult to carry my gun on a daily basis without flagging myself with that barrel, right? Because I carry an appendix carry position, which means right here, I'm flagging everything on myself with that barrel, right? Even if I carry in a hip holster, right, I'm flagging myself as I tuck that into that hip holster. If I carry in a underarm shoulder holster, right, I'm flagging everybody behind me with that gun, right? So here's the deal. When we say don't point the barrel at anything that you're not willing to destroy, at that point in time, we're assuming that you're actively using the firearm, handling the firearm. If that gun is sitting there on a table, right, not a big deal. Go to any gun show in this country. You cannot walk through a gun show without having weapons pointed at you. It's physically impossible to do because they have so many guns in there. They're all pointing across at each other. There's just no way to do it. And so the idea here is that we try to stay away from the muzzle at all possible. But really, whenever somebody is handling that weapon, then that's when that muzzle discipline really kind of comes into play. So when we put a gun inside of a holster or we put it inside of a bag, at that point in time, as a society, we kind of render that gun safe. And so then we kind of accept that the gun is going to be pointed at people, right? Because if I put a gun in a gun rack or in a lockbox in my truck, as I'm driving down the road, I am inadvertently flagging people as I come down the road. So we have to keep that in mind, that it's impossible to never point it at anything, but we're trying not to point it at things, obviously, while we're actively handling the firearm. So that's your second safety rule. Third one here is understand your target and what's beyond it. And what this means when it comes to defensive shooting is shoot-throughs do happen, right? There's no rule that says that just because I fire this gun at somebody that bullet is stopping in them like it does in the movies and sending them flying 10 feet back, right? That's not how it happens in reality. There's a good chance that gun is going to penetrate that person, right? It could hit somebody behind them. You end up with what's called over penetration, right? Especially if you're using larger calibers like a 40 cal or a 10 millimeter or something along those lines. And so that becomes a pretty big concern. So we always want to make sure that we understand what's beyond our target. The other thing that understanding what's beyond our target, there's no rule that says that you're not going to miss. And in fact, the rules suggest that you probably will miss. About 73% of law enforcement engage, or about throughout law enforcement engagements, about 73% of their shots will miss. This is according to the New York Police Department and the LA Police Department. They both came up with the same statistic on this. About 73% of the times when their officers fire, they will miss, which means when things are stressful, your heart's racing. At that point in time, it's very difficult to hit your shots. And so chances are you're probably going to miss that person at some point in time. And so you've really got to know your target and what is beyond it. And so this comes really big into play when we start talking about like riot control and stuff like that, because I hear a lot of people say, well, if somebody breaks in and puts their hand through my vehicle, I'm just going to pull out my gun and start shooting. It's like, hey, you better be careful, because if there's some guy behind them pulling them off, saying, hey, this isn't what we're about, this isn't what we're protesting, whatever it is, and you hit both them, sure, the first person might be self-defense. That second person that you hit, that's murder. So, sorry, just hit my microphone, y'all. So, we've got to be very careful about that. We really need to know what is beyond our target and what those shoot-throughs capabilities are, and then what the capabilities are if we miss. And so, because both those things are fairly likely to happen. So, understand your target and what's beyond it. Your fourth one, right, and this is arguably the most important one, we treat all firearms as if they're loaded. We never, under any circumstances, treat this firearm as if it's not loaded. So I don't clear my gun. Okay, I know there's no bullet in there, and then my wife and I are going to work disarming techniques, and I hold the gun pointed at her. No. If you're going to do disarming techniques, right, we're going to use something like a blue gun, right, something that allows us, which is a fake plastic gun, it's painted bright blue so that nobody can mistake it for a real gun. And so if you're going to do things like that, you've got to use fake guns that are designed for that purpose. We don't use real guns in those capacities. We don't use real guns to train in that sense, right? We're never pointing a gun. We treat them always as if they're loaded. If you do that one principle, the other three kind of follow behind it, right? So those are your four principles for Cooper safety, right? These are the four things that you really want to ingrain in you. When you come on a range for a classroom, your safety fundamental rules will expand on all four of those. You'll get given a brief generally on all four of Cooper's four safety rules. And then from there, they're actually going to have more restrictions. And they're going to say if you have a negligent discharge at any point in time, right? So if the gun goes off because you were pulling the trigger or you went to holster or whatever it is, you're going to be asked to leave. If you break the 180, meaning that if we say we have a 180-degree line out from us and you realize your other people shooting are at 180 degrees, so they're actually going to treat it like it's 170. At that point in time, if you break that 180 line, you're going to be done shooting for the day and you're going to be asked to go home. You may be allowed to stay and continue watching the training, but they'll make you take your gun off and clear you off the range, and that happens periodically. We do have people come out, pay for a class, and no, they do not get a refund because you still took somebody's slot. I will give you a discount on the next class, but you won't get a refund. You'll just be having to come back for retraining. And so the assumption is that when you come to a class, you know how to be safe with a gun. And that's pretty typical for most training schools. If you don't know how to be safe with a gun, you really need to go and take a gun safety class first. So hope that helps you guys get started. That's your 4 safety rules for your first level of firearms ownership.